Okay, let's take a look at problem 24-2A, which is a flexible budgeting demo with an emphasis on the fixed budget performance report. The information is given to you in yellow. That was given in the problem, and the requirements appear down here. So let's take a look at number 1, which asks us to classify all the items in the fixed budget as variable or fixed, and then also determine their amounts per unit or their amounts for the year as appropriate. And I see I have one spelling error here. I'll take care of that. If I can get that typed in right, much better. Okay, the expected sales appears in that cell, which is 20,000 units. So what we've got to first do is determine which is variable and which are fixed. And you want to approach this thinking about what's the relevant range for variability at around that 20,000 units. So think about the 20,000 expected sales units as the expected value, and we're looking at changes that are only within a relative range. Okay, so sales certainly would be variable, right? For every unit we sell, we expect to get that much more dollars. So if we take the 3 million and divide it by expected units, and I'll lock that in with the F4 key, we know that that dollar amount is going to be $150. Okay, direct materials, the same thing. Now let me get the formula right. Okay, lock that in, $60. In this case, we don't need the dollar sign anymore, right? Direct labor, the same thing. We expect that labor will behave in a variable fashion. As we need to make more goods, we expect to use hour for hour more labor costs. It's a pretty reasonable assumption. Machinery and repairs, they're telling us it's variable, so that's straightforward. Depreciation on the plant equipment, well, the depreciation on the plant equipment is a fixed cost. So let's just put that right there. Utilities, they're telling us, is variable. So if I copy from here, or 50,000 of it is variable. So take the 50,000 and divide that by the 20,000 units, and that should give us a $2.50 per cost, variable cost. What that also means then is we've got 150,000, 200,000 less the 50,000 variable cost is a fixed portion. So utilities represents a mixed cost, and the plant manager's salaries I believe is going to be entirely fixed. Okay, he's going to get paid the same regardless of changes within the relative range of volume. Now looking at the selling expenses, the packaging cost of 60,000 is going to be a variable cost. So again, I can copy from above, right, at $4 per unit. The shipping cost at $5.80. Sales salary is fixed at $160,000. Advertising expense, again, we can copy. I believe advertising is considered, oh no, the advertising is going to be considered, they're not going to change that over time. We need to think about that as a fixed cost and not a variable component. And the salaries behaves the same way. So an entertainment expense, I imagine, does too. Okay, if we've done this right, we should be able to generate what our variable per unit cost was for all the costs. And what did we come up with here? $88.15, 15 cents. And on the fixed cost, we don't need the decimal points, but I do need to make this wide enough so we can see it. Let me shrink this so we still don't lose the screen here. We get 1,112,000, and that takes care of part 1. I'll just put an underline here so we know that we're dealing with totals in these cells right here. Okay, now we want to prepare a flexible budget at sales of 18,000 and 24,000. Okay, now normally we would put this in a proper contribution margin form. So we would have sales up top, then the variable costs, and the fixed costs down below. We would also show a contribution margin. Why don't I do that? I'm going to insert a row right here. And rather than, I'm not going to put the whole thing in proper form, but I will do the contribution margin calculation. So the contribution margin would be equal to the sales, right, less the variable cost per unit, and the contribution margin is $61.85. Okay? Now, again, I'm not going to reformat it. It'll take too much time in this demo, but I do want to work through the problem. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at what happens if we have $18,000 of variable cost, and what happens if we have $24,000 of variable cost is the wrong word, of sales. We need to prepare a flexible budget at those different volumes. Okay, well, the way we would calculate that is, we know that we can take that $150 times the number of units to generate what we think that amount will be. Once we have that, I can copy that here. Oh, by the way, this needs to be 18,000 units as our title, and this one would be 24,000 units. Okay, so I've got 2,7. Now I need to multiply that one times the 24,000 to come up with $3.6 million in sales. These are all going to be variable costs, so we'll take that cost per unit times the 18,000 units, right? Now if I lock in the G24, I can then copy that to anywhere else I've got a variable cost and just copy right on down to generate those amounts. Now, with fixed cost, if the costs are fixed and we're within the relative range of where we don't need to add capacity to cover new equipment needs because of high volume, or we're not selling them off if we were at a lower volume, then we simply copy the fixed cost right in. Okay? Now let's do it over on this side. We're going to take that per unit times the number of units. I'll lock that in and copy all the variable components. Hopefully you see how I'm doing that. And then the fixed cost, again, won't change, so we can simply copy those over. Okay, now to compute the contribution margin, if we had this in the right form, we would take the sales less the variable cost and be able to generate that relatively easily. Since I'm not putting them in the right order, I'm going to do it sort of in a modified way. Why don't we insert a few rows here, and what we'll do is we'll just jot down sales from above. Let me draw a line under this to show that we're starting on the problem in a little bit different area. And then we will have less the variable costs, which will generate our contribution margin, right? Less fixed costs. Oh, looks like I'm going to need a few more cells, and I know some of this is scrolling off the screen for you, so you won't see what's on the bottom. Less our fixed costs would be income from operations. Okay, so if we generate that, I'll just simply copy the sales from above. And now the less variable cost, I'm going to just basically grab all the variable cost items, which is this cell plus, excuse me, I got to do this right, equal this cell plus this cell plus this cell plus this cell. I'm basically grabbing anywhere I have a variable cost per unit, appearing about three columns to the left, right? So that's my variable costs. And I've got a formula error. It's asked to correct it. That's the right amount. Once I have that, I can copy that formula there. And you'll see it's highlighting all the correct ones. Okay, so contribution margin would equal sales less our variable costs. And the fixed costs, we're going to do the same thing, just sum anywhere where I had the fixed cost. And quite frankly, I don't even need to do that. All of these were simply copied, so I can grab the 1,112,000 from there, because it's not going to change, since the difference between 18,000 units and 24,000 still falls within the relative range of how this flexible budget report would work. And our income from operations would then be equal to that amount less that amount, or 1,300, or 372. Okay, so we've prepared now a flexible budget at different sales volumes. Let me slide up, and we were going to prepare it for 18,000 and 24,000 units. I can underline this so we can see that that's what it's being prepared for. Actually, the underline doesn't look right. I think maybe a better way is to maybe change the color a little bit, so we understand that those are units, not part of. Those are units rather than dollars. The rest of these represent dollars in this column and in this column. Okay, now let's look at the third part. The company's business condition is improving. One possible result is a sales volume of approximately 28,000 units. They're confident that that volume falls within the relative range of existing capacity. What that sentence is telling you is that fixed cost won't change. We have enough equipment to support 28,000 units that wouldn't change our relationship of variable and fixed cost. All the fixed costs would remain the same, and all the variable costs would still behave in the same fashion based on that higher level of activity. All right, how much would operating income increase over the 2005 budget amount of 125,000? That was that amount right there, if the level is reached without increasing capacity. Okay, so here's how we could solve this. They're asking us what's the possible sales in units, and we think that possible sales is 28,000, right? Okay. Now, we can calculate the contribution margin per unit. We already know what that is. We calculated it as 61.85. So if we take that 61.85 times, actually, why don't I just write that down? We'll drop the 61.85 right there. Okay. Then we can generate the total contribution margin. And that's going to be in a dollar value, so I'll go ahead and leave it in dollars. Okay, then we would need to subtract our fixed cost, and the fixed cost is going to come from right there that we calculated previously. Right? So we have a potential operating income of the contribution margin amount less the fixed cost, right? 619,800. Well, what was the budget amount? From above, let's just label that from above, was equal to, what was it? 125,000. That cell right there, right? Okay. So what that generates is an increase over budget, and I'm going to put this one in so we can see that that's a calculation, and that is going to be of the 619 less the 498,000. Okay, so the whole point here is there's no increase in fixed cost, and we are spreading those fixed costs over more and more units. So what we're seeing is the effect of operating leverage. And operating leverage is the concept of what percentage of fixed cost makes up your income statement or your level of costs. And if you have any fixed cost and you have higher sales and you have a positive contribution margin, then what you will see is for every increase in sales, you will get a higher than that same percentage increase in sales in profit. So that means if we have a 1% increase in sales and a positive contribution margin, with any amount of fixed cost, the effects of operating leverage tells us that we will have greater than a 1% increase in profits. Okay, that takes care of part 3, and